So sometimes we wore funny hats to say this scene we don't like. They don't like this one.
We just did this thing. That was when they were going to sue us for.
There are moments in television history that feel like accidents. Happy, chaotic, unrepeatable accidents. The kind that no writer's room could manufacture, no casting director could engineer, and no network executive could take credit for. The arrival of Lenny and Squiggy on Laverne and Shirley was exactly that kind of moment. For years, the full story behind those two leather-jacketed lunatics remained tucked away in the private memories of the people who lived it. Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall, the two women who anchor one of the most beloved sitcoms in American television history, spent decades deflecting questions about what really went on behind those studio doors. They gave interviews, they laughed, they reminisced, but they never quite opened the door all the way. Until now, because the story of Lenny and Squiggy isn't just a funny footnote. It's the story of how instinct, friendship, and a little beautiful chaos changed the DNA of American comedy forever. To understand why Cindy and Penny stayed quiet for so long, you have to understand what Laverne and Shirley meant to them personally. This wasn't just a job. It wasn't just a hit show, though it absolutely was that, regularly beating Happy Days in the ratings and becoming the #1 show in America for multiple seasons in the late 1970s. For both women, it was something far more personal. Penny Marshall, who had spent years in her brother Gary Marshall's orbit, finally had something that was entirely her own, a character, a face, a comedic identity that the public recognized and adored. Cindy Williams, who had already earned serious dramatic credibility with her work in American Graffiti, had taken a genuine risk stepping into a broad sitcom format. Laverne and Shirley was their shared triumph. So when David Lander and Michael McKean entered the picture and threatened, in the most lovable way imaginable, to steal the entire show, the dynamic was complicated, not bitter, not hostile, but complicated in the way that all genuine human relationships are complicated when ego, affection, and professional survival are all tangled together in the same room. Penny was the one who found them first, or more accurately, she was the one who recognized what she had stumbled onto. The circumstances were informal, almost absurdly so. David Lander and Michael McKean were already known in Los Angeles comedy circles through their work with The Credibility Gap, a satirical performance group that had built a devoted cult following. They were talented, they were sharp, and they had been developing these two characters, these ridiculous, magnetic, inexplicably confident oddballs, for years. When they performed them at a social gathering at Penny's home, the reaction was immediate and physical. People didn't just laugh. They leaned forward. They grabbed the arms of whoever was sitting next to them. They watched with the delighted helplessness of people who know they're witnessing something they won't be able to fully explain later. Penny, who had one of the most finely calibrated comedy instincts in the business, saw it immediately. She didn't need a focus group. She didn't need a pilot test. She needed to get these two men in front of her brother as fast as humanly possible. What happened when she did is the part of the story that Cindy and Penny had always told in broad strokes, but never in full detail. Gary Marshall, the creator and guiding force behind Laverne and Shirley, was not a man who made decisions lightly. He understood comedy structurally, almost architecturally. He thought about a television show the way a builder thinks about load-bearing walls. Every element had to serve a function, and if you removed or changed one thing, everything else shifted. When Penny brought Lander and McKean to him, his first response wasn't unqualified enthusiasm. It was curiosity. He watched them. He listened. He thought about where they would fit in the ecosystem of the show he was building. And then he understood it. The thing that Penny had felt instinctively and that he now saw clearly. These two men were the missing counterweight. Every comedy needs contrast. Laverne and Shirley was already doing something remarkable by centering two working-class women as the heroes of their own story. Women with ambitions, vulnerabilities, and a friendship that felt lived in and real. But even the most relatable underdogs benefit from having someone standing slightly below them on the social ladder, reminding the audience, with warmth, never cruelty, that things could always be more chaotic, more confused, more gloriously wrong. Lenny and Squiggy were that reminder. They were the comedic floor that made the ceiling feel higher. Cindy Williams has spoken in later years about the first time she performed alongside them on set, and what she describes as something close to a controlled collision. She knew they were funny. She had been told they were funny. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it in real time are entirely different things. What struck her wasn't just the jokes. It was the physical reality of them, the way they occupied space, the way they seemed to be operating on a frequency, just slightly removed from the world everyone else was living in. David Lander brought a twitchy, mercurial energy to Lenny, unpredictable in the best sense, like a pinball machine that had just been tilted. Michael McKean as Squiggy was somehow both more grounded and more surreal, a man completely convinced of his own appeal in a way that was simultaneously delusional and oddly charming. Together, they created something that neither could have achieved alone. Their chemistry wasn't performed. It was a product of years of genuine friendship and creative collaboration, and an audience can always tell the difference. The characters themselves went through a significant transformation before they became the Lenny and Squiggy that audiences fell in love with. The original conception paired Lenny with a character named Anthony, another Italian neighborhood guy, cut from broadly similar cloth as several characters already populating the show. The producers recognized the redundancy quickly. Phil Foster was already playing Frank DeFazio with broad, loving Italian-American energy. Eddie Mecca's Carmine Ragusa was already filling a specific romantic and comic niche. Adding another Italian character to that mix wasn't addition, it was repetition. So Anthony was replaced with Squiggy. Andrew Squiggy Squigman, with a name that sounded like a punchline before he even opened his mouth. The name was strange and percussive and perfect, snapping against Lenny's quieter, more everyman identity like a rubber band. Penny Marshall once said, with characteristic deadpan, that the name change alone was worth a laugh track. She wasn't wrong. There's something about Squiggy that's inherently funny. It resists dignity while somehow demanding attention. What that change freed, beyond the obvious cosmetic differences, was a character's essential weirdness. Anthony had a context, a community, a cultural framework. Squiggy had none of those things. He existed outside any recognizable ethnic or social category, which meant he could exist anywhere the writers needed him to be. He could show up at the brewery, at the apartment, at a bowling alley, at what appeared to be a very questionable social event. And his presence always made the same kind of sense, which is to say, it made no sense at all, and that was precisely the point. The freedom of being untethered from specific cultural roots allowed the character to become something purer, a force of nature. And forces of nature, by definition, cannot be contained by a character description or a backstory. They simply arrive. Penny Marshall, for all her warmth and humor in talking about those years, has also been candid about the pressure that came with sharing a stage with Lander and McKean. The on-set dynamic was one of genuine affection. She loved these men, respected them enormously, and valued what they brought to the show in ways she articulated freely. But affection doesn't eliminate professional anxiety. When two performers are generating the kind of audience response that Lenny and Squiggy generated, when the studio erupts the moment a door opens before a single word is spoken, you feel it. You feel the energy of the room pivoting toward them and away from you. And Penny and Cindy, as the anchors of the show, had to make a choice every single time that happened. They could fight it, lean into the competition, try to reclaim the room, or they could do something much harder and much smarter. They could hold steady. They could be the still point around which the chaos revolved. They chose stillness, and it was a choice that defined the show's success as much as any individual performance. Cindy has described this in terms of what she calls reactive comedy, the art of responding rather than initiating, of letting the joke come to you rather than chasing it. When Squiggy said something absurd, the camera would often catch Shirley's face in a half second before the laugh track hit, and what you'd see there was a masterclass in subtle expression. The slightly widened eyes, the almost imperceptible jaw tightening, the look of a woman processing something genuinely baffling and choosing, with great effort, to remain composed. Those reactions were not accidents. They were performances within performances, carefully calibrated to give the joke room to land, while also keeping the emotional reality of the scene intact. It is, in the view of many comedy scholars and performers who have studied the show, some of the finest reactive work in sitcom history. Behind the cameras, the situation was even more layered. Penny and Cindy have spoken, in different contexts and with varying degrees of candor, about the genuine difficulty of not breaking character when Lander and McKean were doing what they did. The problem wasn't that they were being deliberately disruptive. They weren't. Lander and McKean were consummate professionals who understood the structure of the show and worked within it with precision. The problem was that they were genuinely funny in a way that bypassed professional defenses. Penny has a line she's used in multiple interviews. You tell yourself, don't look at them. Just do not look at them. Because looking at them, catching even a peripheral glimpse of whatever Lander was doing with his face or the particular angle of McKean's delivery was enough to shatter composure entirely. Crew members would hide behind equipment. Sound technicians would bite down on their headphones. Directors would look at the ceiling. The whole set became a study in suppressed laughter, a group of professionals collectively white-knuckling their way through scenes that wanted very badly to collapse into chaos. That the show rarely did collapse, that it maintained its structure and its emotional integrity even in the wildest moments, is a testament to the discipline of everyone involved, but especially to Penny and Cindy. They were the frame, and without a solid frame, even the most beautiful chaotic energy dissipates into noise. Their willingness to hold that frame, even at personal comedic cost, even when every instinct told them to just let go and laugh, that is the invisible architecture of the show's greatness. The chemistry between all four performers was also a product of something that doesn't get discussed enough in the narrative of the show: genuine mutual respect. Lander and McKean were not trying to steal the show in any malicious or competitive sense. They understood, better perhaps than anyone, the role they were meant to play. They were the release valve, the pressure release that Gary Marshall had designed into the show's structure so that emotional scenes wouldn't come too heavy and comedic scenes wouldn't run out of oxygen. When you understand your function in a piece of work, that clearly you can perform it with generosity rather than ambition. And that generosity came through on screen. Lenny and Squiggy never felt like they were competing with Laverne and Shirley. They felt like they belonged to the same universe, the same neighborhood,